Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Show. My name is Javier Soriano. I'm a Principal Product Manager in Microsoft Sentinel. And today we're going to be talking about a super exciting topic. So I've been working in Sentinel for the last 5 years since GA. And this to me is the biggest revolution in the product in all this time. And that's the new data lake that we introduced recently. To speak about that, I have my friend David. David, please introduce yourself.
Hey, thanks, Javier. Hi, my name is David Hoerster, and like Javier, I am a product manager on the Sentinel team, on the customer experiences team, CXE. And I've been not with the team as long as Javier, but I've been in Microsoft security for about 4 years now. And looking forward to talking about this today.
Perfect. Thanks, David, and welcome to the show. So the first question is pretty obvious. What did we announce just a few days ago?
No, it's a great question. As you alluded to, we did announce the public preview of the Sentinel Data Lake on July 22nd. So it's a pretty exciting announcement. And what it really does is it allows our customers to unify their security data across their state in a cost-effective way. And what we're really providing them is the ability to access that data in a number of different modalities. So whether they like to use KQL, Jupyter notebooks will enable that, and really enable the ability to access that data across their entire retention timeframe. So it really helps them get to the data, do their investigations in a fast and effective way, instead of having to run additional jobs to transform data to get it to the shape that they want it to in order to start running that.
Cool. So basically, a new data lake, approach in Sentinel that is basically allowing customers to ingest the data at a lower cost, right? And being able to analyze the data with different modalities. But we had something in the past that we called auxiliary logs. So what happened to customers that were using that? Is it integrated in any way with the new data lake or not?
So customers that are currently using auxiliary logs today, when they enable the data lake, those auxiliary logs will automatically be part of the data lake. So they'll still be able to access those logs. They'll still be able to ingest those logs the same way they were doing it today through DCRs. That data will continue to flow into the data lake. And so from the logs perspective, that's not really changing. It's really just going to end up as part of the lake, where they can start to work with those auxiliary log data sources along with all the other sources that are present in the data lake.
Are the ingestion methods that I used in Sentinel in the past affected in any way? Do I need to change anything in how I send data into Sentinel, either the analytics tier or this new data lake tier?
So that's the beauty of the data lake, is that it's really built to go ahead and work with the existing connectors that you use today in Sentinel. So if I have data connectors already enabled to start ingesting data into Sentinel, those connectors can direct data directly into the lake if I wanted to. They can continue to send data to the analytics tier, and that data in the analytics tier will get mirrored down into the data lake. So really, by using connectors and even DCRs today, you can still ingest data into the data lake, continue to ingest data into Sentinel, and really have your workflows continue to flow like they usually do.
So David, I want to zoom in into one thing that you mentioned just there, right? That the data that you send into the analytics tier gets mirrored to the lake. Can you explain a bit more on that? And does it have any cost concerns or considerations for the customer?
Yeah, the concept of mirroring is really one of the powers that the data lake really provides our customers. So if you think of when I ingest data into the analytics tier, into my hot tier in the Sentinel, you think of it as like a pipe that data is traveling in on. What mirroring really does is it takes that pipe and it forks it. And so essentially I'm having data flow into the analytics tier, the hot tier, but then also into the data lake tier. So as a result of that, I have this automatic synchronization of data in my analytics tier and in my data lake tier. So it allows customers to be able to say, you know what, I have stuff up in the analytics tier, but I have this greater corpus of data in the data lake because of mirroring and also direct ingestion into the lake. So I can do, really deep investigations of my data because it's all centralized there. Now you mentioned cost. So that mirroring of the data from the analytics tier down to the data lake tier is available at no cost when the data lake retention is at the analytics retention level. So if I have 90 days of retention up in analytics, that data is mirrored down to the data lake. If I just keep retention in the data lake for 90 days, there's no additional cost there. Now, if I want to extend the retention of that data in the data lake, which I probably do because I'm going to be doing more historical or trend analysis, then you're going to end up paying the data lake storage cost for that additional time beyond the retention of that log in the analytics tier.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Thanks for that. Is your first Ninja episode, David? But just so you know, what we do here is deep technical stuff. And for that, we want to do a demo of this new data lake thing, right? So let's do it.
Okay, so let's take a look at the data lake in the Defender portal. So one thing to note is that really to onboard to the data lake, your primary workspace in Sentinel needs to be connected to the Defender portal. So if you are interested in the data lake, take a look at our docs on Microsoft Learn, and it will walk through the prerequisites to be able to onboard to the lake. But that is a key one because everything we're going to be doing here in our demo is through the Defender portal. And so that is something you're going to be required to be able to connect up to. All right, so let's take a look at the different capabilities of the data lake in the Defender portal right now for our public preview. So here I am in the Defender portal. As you can see, I've already onboarded our demo environment to the lake. So I get this nice friendly banner. Here, our lake is ready. I'm ready to take a dip into the lake. Here, the water's nice. So let's take a look, see what we have. So in the Microsoft Sentinel menu section, there's a couple new menu options that really help you start to manage the lake, and then also to explore the lake. So under configuration in Microsoft Sentinel, there's a couple new options here. Really one new option and one that's enhanced. So we'll take a look at what tables is all about first, and that's really our table management experience. And really that's where you're going to start to work with the different tables that you have in your workspace and determine, do I want this in the analytics tier? Do I want it in the data lake tier? And then what retention periods do I want to be able to have? So instead of reloading pages and all that kind of stuff, I'm just going to go to some different tabs where I already have these things already loaded. So if I click on tables under Microsoft Sentinel, under the configuration section, here's our table management experience. So I can filter on table names. So I want to take a look at some of my DNS type of tables. And I have a DNS events table here. And right off the bat, I can see, hey, this is set for the analytics tier, and here's my retention settings. So 1 year, both of analytics and total retention. Analytics retention really means, from the analytics tier, how much like real-time data do I have available? And then total retention is really how much is being mirrored down into the lake and how much data is actually being kept in the lake. So let's take a look at if I wanted to, adjust this. So if I click on that table, this little flyout pops out and I can select DNS events. And here I have an option here to say manage table. In order to enable that feature, you need to be a log analytics contributor role to be able to click this manage table, by the way. So when I select that, I can choose for this particular table, whether it's analytics tier or the data lake tier. If it's in the analytics tier, as we kind of saw in that high level overview in the table, I have my analytics retention setting and also my total retention setting. And I can adjust this if I want to. I can have total retention all the way up to 12 years. And same with analytics, I can have up to 2 years of analytics retention. If I choose to, I can say, you know what? I don't need DNS events to continue to populate into the analytics tier. I want to change DNS events to be able to start populating directly into the data lake tier. And so I can change the tier of this table by clicking this little radio button and then setting the retention period for that table in the data lake. Now, it's key to note, though, when I make this selection, this is all forward only. So when I change the tier of that particular table, whatever data is already up in the analytics tier will stay there, but then new data that's being ingested in a fill forward fashion will be going into the data lake at that point and only into the data lake. So that's key to keep in mind.
And one important thing that I wanted to mention, right? You get a little warning right above, right? When you select data lake tier, you get a little warning above saying that there's content like analytic rules, hunting queries, and so on that will stop working because you're moving the table to a different tier. Is that correct?
Yep.
And one thing that I wanted to mention here as well, right, is that This is a fundamental difference compared to what we could do before with auxiliary tables, right? Because auxiliary, I needed to create it as a custom log table. I was
Yep.
not able to do this thing, right, of switching from one tier to the other. This is a key differentiation of the data lake. So quite impressive, right? Because just doing it in this way is much more user-friendly for the operator.
Yeah, I'm doing it all through the portal, so I don't need to make API calls or create
DCRs and all that stuff, yeah.
yeah, all sorts of JSON objects and things like that. So I could go ahead and change this, but this is our demo environment, so I'm not going to make any changes to it right now. But again, I could change this retention period all the way up to 12 years if I wanted to. And I would just hit save, and then essentially, within a minute or two, probably even less than that, new data will start to be ingested directly into the lake. So that's table management. And so it really allows you to kind of go through all the different tables that you have and start to make those decisions of where do I want this data to continue to live? What makes the most sense for our security needs, for what we're doing from an investigation perspective and trend analysis and all that. So really powerful, just like you said, Javier. The table management experience also finds its way into data connectors. So you're familiar with the data connectors option in Microsoft Sentinel. This is where I can configure the different data connectors where I'm going to begin ingesting new data into Sentinel. And so table management also is part of the connector configuration experience. So when I click on configuration, I select data connectors. This screen is pretty much the same. I now this unified connectors and Sentinel is a newer option. But again, I have the connectors that I have available, and I can see whether or not they're enabled or not. So we'll take a look at Azure Firewall, and I'll open up the connector page like I usually would. And in this case, there's a new widget on this page, which is table management. Again, this is using the same type of experience that the full-blown table management page has, but I can see the different tables that are associated to this connector. And I can see that, again, just like I did with the table management page, a high-level summary of all the different tables that the connector is configured for and the retention values these tables all have. Now I can go through each one of these tables and then start to become a little bit more fine-grained in terms of where I want this data to reside. So let's say network rules. Again, I want to be able to manage that particular table. And so right now it's going to the analytics tier for 1 year of analytics retention in addition to 1 year of total data lake mirrored retention. But again, I could say, you know what? I don't want this to go to the analytics table. Maybe I just wanted to ingest it directly into the lake. So this allows you to start to configure connectors and ingest data directly into the data lake instead of having to go through the analytics tier and maybe, doing other jobs or whatnot to get the data down to the lake. So if you only need it in the lake, this is a great way to be able to ingest that data directly into the data lake.
Very cool. So what do we do whenever data is in the data lake? So imagine that I change a table to be data lake only. How can I query that data? Do I query it from advanced hunting as I do with other tables, or there's a new place for those queries to happen?
That's another great question. You have lots of great questions. So we have this concept also in the Defender portal. And this is where we get into the data lake exploration section. So I want to be able to query that data. I want to be able to see what's in the lake. And so if I go into data lake exploration, there's an option here called KQL queries. And what KQL queries is, it's very similar to how advanced hunting looks, right? I have my tables on the left-hand side. I have a KQL editor here in the center, and then I have my results down below. And I can go ahead and start to query the different aspects of my lake through this interface. So in this case here, we didn't really talk about this earlier. I actually have two tabs open here. The first table that I'm querying is what's called an asset table. And so if I opened up my workspace scope, you would notice that I actually have two entries here. One is called default, and the other one is my Sentinel workspace that's connected to the Defender portal. And this is the one that I'm familiar with. And I might say, well, what's this default? So the other interesting part of the data lake, and I apologize, I didn't mention this earlier, is that in addition to data being mirrored down into the lake and being ingested directly into the lake, and that's really your activity data, the data lake also provides asset information. These are items like my users, my groups, my applications, and then also from Azure resources, gives me information about the different resources I have available. Why would I want this type of information? Well, if I have sign-in information or maybe device information, whatever that might be, it's good to know sometimes when I'm doing investigations, I need to enrich that data a bit more. Maybe I need to know more information about that particular user that's being flagged from a sign-in log. Maybe I need to understand a bit more that user, what groups they have access to or what applications they may have access to. And so what the assets really allow you to do now is to kind of enrich that data. And really, because they're both in the lake, you have that adjacency of that asset data and your activity data together, where you can really start to really enrich that data quite nicely.
And David, this asset data that you have in the default workspace, it's something that I don't have to do anything to get populated, right? Like when I onboard into the data lake, it gets there, right?
Yep. So it's just there. So you can take advantage of that right off the bat. There's really nothing really to configure for that. And really, these are going to be some of the underlying principles that other services and other capabilities that the lake's going to begin to enable down the road. These asset pieces will really help to build out like graph capabilities and all that type of cool stuff. So again, I can just take a quick query of my asset tables here. So that's what entry users is doing here. So I can kind of see the results below. And then also I could change that workspace and maybe go after my activity data. So this is this other workspace here where I'm going to query my sign-in logs. I'm going to filter based on the user principal name, and I'm just going to take 10, and you can kind of see what interesting data pops up as a result of that.
Yeah, no, a regular query like I would do in the analytics tier as well. It's just that I'm able to do it now in the data lake data, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We took a look at a pretty simple KQL query here that we can do within the Defender portal, querying the data lake. And let's say I've just created this really interesting query, and maybe it's something I want to run on a regular basis. Maybe it's like pulling out some interesting alerts or evidence type of information, and I need to send it to the analytics tier on a regular basis, just to kind of help with my investigations. And that's really where jobs can come into play. So I can craft that query here in KQL queries, test it out, make sure it looks good. And I can actually create a job right from this query, right from this panel. So if I click on the create job option, you can go ahead and essentially encapsulate that KQL query in a job. And just like it sounds like, a job allows you to schedule the running of that KQL query on a regular basis, or maybe I just want to run it on an ad hoc basis. But I can just enter in some basic information here. So test job 1. And we're not going to save it, but just so you kind of get a sense of what that workflow looks like. So I just give the job a name, a description, select what workspace I want to be able to run this job against. And I can actually say, when I get the results of that KQL query, do I want to send those results to a new table, or do I want to just append to an existing table? So I can say, hey, I even want to just create a brand new table. And these table names have to be unique across the tenant, and it'll append a KQL-CL suffix to it. And then I can go ahead and perhaps modify the query that I originally created in KQL queries. So there's a couple of warnings here just to make sure that you're aware of what you're doing there. And then I can go ahead and set the schedule for my job, whether I want it to run one time or I want it to run on a schedule. So I can run it every day, week, month, and set my starting and ending times and all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and save this, but you kind of get a sense of how I can go ahead and create these jobs and potentially run them.
I wanted to mention, David, that customers might think, hey, what happens with summary rules, right? And we're building right now a comparison table because there's some things that are different between the two. They kind of have the same goal, but for example, with KQL jobs, I have a much more rich KQL language that I can use. I can use joins and unions and everything else that I want. So are quite powerful. They also have a longer look back. So yeah, we'll publish that in the documentation so it's clear for everyone when to use each. But summary rules are also supported in the data lake, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Cool.
Great point. And then just like with the jobs I create, I can use the jobs menu here, the Defender portal, and I can go ahead and if I wanted to take a look at an existing job, see if it's succeeded or run history and all that type of stuff. I can actually see the KQL that's running and all that kind of stuff. So lots of really great information about the jobs that you're creating through the Defender portal and KQL queries.
Perfect. So you also mentioned in the introduction that besides KQL modality to access the data, we also have Spark, right? So how do I do that?
Jupyter Notebooks, yes. So as you can see here, we even create notebook jobs too. So, but how do you go about doing that? So right now, our primary way of working with Jupyter Notebooks is through VS Code. So I have VS Code here. Let's bring that up. And we have an extension that you can get from the VS Code marketplace, and it's called the Microsoft Sentinel extension. So if you just went to extensions and you typed in Microsoft Sentinel, I already have it installed, but you can go ahead and install that right through VS Code. It takes about 30 seconds, and once you have that installed, you're up and running. You can start to connect to the data lake through VS Code. So the extension itself provides you a little extension menu here that gives you insight into the tables that are available in the data lake along with jobs. And just like we saw in KQL queries, it's a very similar visualization here. So I can take a look at all the different tables that I have in my Woodgrove Log Analytics Sentinel workspace. If I click on a particular table, it's nice because I can get the workspace name, the ID, and all the different fields and the types for those particular columns. This is really useful when I start to actually build out my notebook logic. So I can go ahead and use this information to kind of help me craft my notebooks. And so once I do that, essentially all I have to do is create a new Jupyter notebook, so an IPYMB extension. And if you're a Python person, it should be fairly straightforward, right? I start to create my Python code and I go ahead and execute that on a cell-by-cell basis. I have access to other plugins like pandas, other libraries that really help me enhance the investigations and everything else that I'm doing with my notebook work. So I can have some really nice outputs. I can do all sorts of sorting and filtering and whatnot with everything I'm doing here with Logic.
And we have some samples, right, in our documentation on how to do this?
That's correct, yeah. So if you go to our documentation under data lake exploration, I think that's the topic. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think that's it, yeah. So when I'm using this notebook option, David, where is that Python code running? Is there a compute that is managed by Microsoft that I have to choose, to select? How do I do that?
When a customer onboards to the data lake, really there's a Spark cluster that's provisioned for that customer behind the scenes. The customer doesn't have to do that. It's automatically provisioned and managed by Microsoft for you. So once you've onboarded to the data lake, you can go ahead and install the Visual Studio Code extension for Microsoft Sentinel. And at that point, then you can start to write your notebook logic. And then when you go to run it, you really just have to say, well, what kernel do I want to connect to? And what size of the pool do I want to connect to? And so we can do this through VS Code. So it's kind of done for us. I'm going to say I want to select a different kernel, and I'll select the Microsoft Sentinel kernel. So this one is installed when you install the Microsoft Sentinel extension. And it will provide you an option of different pools that you can connect to. And so obviously they're named, small, medium, and large. And so you kind of think about, well, what type of jobs am I running? How much data am I really dealing with? And in our docs, we actually provide a nice little guide as to when to use which pool, when to use small. If I'm just working with like maybe a single table or two of data, medium, maybe I'm doing some more complex joins and other, type of logic. And then large, if I'm, looking back across large amounts of data, joining across multiple tables, doing very complex type of ML type of work. I might want to use large. And we provide information about, how many cores each one of these pools provides. And so that kind of may help you, determine also which pool to use, because obviously, different cores cost a little bit different. It's all based on compute hours.
And just to clarify, like these pools are not constantly running. They're only running when I start a session with them, right?
Correct. So when I go to execute my logic here, so if I say a medium pool, right now, I'm not doing anything against the Spark cluster behind the scenes. Nothing really happens until I go to run the very first cell. Once I go to run this cell, then essentially it's going to have to establish a session on the Spark cluster. Then it might take a few minutes. And then once that session is established, then your cells will run against that cluster and this stuff will happen. One last thing to mention also is part of the extension. If you have a great notebook that you want to run on a regular basis, I can actually create a job from that also, and I can use the extension to say I want to create a scheduled job for that particular notebook. And just like with the KQL query, I can go ahead and set the schedule and description, the job name, and all that type of stuff. And then I can always go through the Sentinel extension itself and take a look at existing jobs and get a sense of like how many runs each job has had, have they succeeded or failed, and all that kind of good stuff.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David, for showing us all these different cool things that the lake is bringing to us. And this is just public preview, right? So we will for sure
That's right.
invite you again when we go to GA so you can tell us all the great things that are coming with the data lake.
Sounds great. Thanks, Javier. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to what the future holds with the data lake. It's going to be really exciting.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.